Hello, everybody. I am Santi Dominguez, CEO and one of the founders of Mestrelab. And today, as part of our COVID-19 training series, I'm going to talk to you about storing, searching, and sharing your analytical and chemical data. And this is something that we do with plugins that we call either Mnova Spectral DB or MyData. This is, as you know, part of a series of trainings or webinars that we have been running, or workshops rather, online workshops. Today, hopefully, is the 28th of April, so we're all here expecting the same thing. And this is our 9th session in the last 3 weeks or so. We have a few others to come. On the 30th, so this Thursday, Chen Peng will be telling us about ligand screening by NMR. And then on the 6th of May, I'm running a session on useful Mnova tips and tricks. So these are mainly general Mnova capabilities, not of the specific plugins. And then on the 8th of May, Camille Jubran will be telling us from Boston, will be telling us about processing, analyzing, and reporting LCMS and DCMS data. So introducing or doing some training on the mass spec capabilities. There have been 8 previous sessions already. And you know, if you're interested in any of those and you happen to miss them, you can contact us for the videos, or you can go to that page on the top, online training, mestrelab.com/free practical training series. And there you can register and request a copy of the video of the session. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about today. Today, what I want to do is to introduce you to MyData or Mnova database, which is a unique tool that allows you to store and manage all your NMR, mass spec, and optical spectroscopy data that you may have processed with Mnova. I want to give you an understanding of the advantages and the unique features of this environment, and to give you the tools to start using the software by following a basic demo, which I'm going to be running probably in about 15 minutes, and which is designed so that you can follow it from your own computer. So hopefully everybody who is attending the session received an email today with an installer for the software, including MyData, and also with some analytical data, in this case, some Mnova documents, and which you should have saved to your disk. And assuming that all that is in place, we can then all follow the same steps in a little bit when I go into the demo. Okay, but before that, let me just give you a bit of an introduction to the tool that I'm talking about today. And as you know, as you probably know already, and you will have seen this slide many times if you have been attending the sessions, Mnova is organized into, is a container that then has a number of plugins. And the plugins are the ones that actually do things with the analytical data. We have what we call basic plugins, and these are the plugins that do the processing and analysis of the different techniques that we support, NMR, mass spec, and ELVIS. You can see them here on the top left. And then below that, we have a number of what we call advanced and specialist tools. And the database, MyData or spectral database, is one of the advanced tools. You can see it circled there in the slide. So what is Spectral DB or MyData? It's a server backend with an Mnova plugin. So you have a server element which is running basically running the searches and storing the data, and a plugin which runs within the Mnova front end, which you use for searching, interrogating, and displaying the results. It is fully integrated with the Mnova standard architecture, and this means that it interacts with all the other Mnova plugins. So, for example, when you want to search NMR, you do it from the data that has been opened with the NMR plugin. When you want to search mass spec, from data that has been opened from the mass spec plugin, and so on. And the tool is designed really to help anybody who generates or handles a significant amount of analytical data, or anybody who works in a group or a department where, okay, so I think I forgot to complete this slide, where being able to share data between people is important. And finally, it allows the storage, management, and searching of all the analytical data. Okay. Basically, as you know, probably with Mnova, you can carry out many different analyses from very simple to very advanced. Any of these can be stored within the database. Okay, so there you have some examples with some of them are LCMS, some of them are optical spectroscopy, and some of them are mass spec examples. All the data supported in Mnova can be handled by the spectral database. And what does the database do for me? What is the value, or what can I achieve with it? Well, firstly, it allows you to quickly find your analytical data and maybe any other relevant data from your colleagues or from project partners, for example. So, you know, quite often, or it could be the case that you are maybe working on a characterization, or you are trying to understand an impurity that you may have, etc. And you may have the feeling that you have seen something like this before. It could also be that somebody else in your group has already seen that impurity or that byproduct, etc., or that product or unknown. The database would allow you to ask that question. Is this something that I or somebody else in my group or department has seen before? Now, this stops you from repeating analysis which somebody else has already done. You know, because, for example, I may have a proton and I may realize with the database that this has already been characterized, which stops me from going and getting a full characterization data set with 2D correlations, etc., to try to work out what I have. You can benefit from the previous work and conclusions that you've done in the past, and also others you have for whose data you have access to. And you can set up reference databases, which can then be accessed by other Mnova plugins. So, for example, the mixture analysis plugin or the QNMR plugin often interact with a database. And finally, you can also organize and optimize your data for reporting and publication. Soon, with a new plugin we are soon releasing, which is called Publish, you'll also be able to generate supplementary information or patents fairly automatically. Okay, so before we go to the demo, I want to talk to you a little bit about the architecture, administration, and uses for the database environment. And just so that you know, at the moment, all of you have installed the MyData flavor of the database. More of that in a minute. That runs on SQLite and is very simple to deploy. One installer, and you have the database already running, the database environment already running on your computer. And probably at the moment, I would expect that unless you have changed something from the installer, you also have the server backend running in the same computer where you're running Mnova. So all you had to do for that was to run the installer. For those who want to run the database to share data between a group, a whole department, or even a whole institution or company, there are other database flavors. You can set it up, or you can install the database on Oracle, MySQL, or PostgreSQL if you favor any of those environments. And it can be potentially deployed internally, but also it could be deployed on the cloud. So we have done that in the past. We tend to work mainly with AWS, but in principle, any cloud environment is fine. Some of the advantages of the database is that, first of all, your data becomes login and password protected. So, you know, instead of sitting on a disk where anybody can potentially access it, it goes on the database, and then only people that have database access with login and password can access it. For those that have many users, we integrate Active Directory, which means that you don't have to set up each user manually in the database environment. Etc. And then from the perspective of databases, the interesting thing about it is that you can set up any number of databases that you want. This is in fact not the case for MyData, the environment that you have right now. I think there we have a limit of 8 or 9. I cannot remember. So you can set up 8 or 9 databases. So you could imagine you could have a database for your compounds, a database for impurities, which you search when you find an impurity in your data, a database for byproducts, and maybe some other databases for example, third-party data, CRO data, etc. or even by project or by category of product, right? So products of synthesis could be one, natural products could be another one, etc. The interesting thing is that when you search, you can search one of the databases or you can search all of them together. Okay, and I was talking to you about flavors. You have 3 flavors. So the first one on the left is the one that you guys have installed, Mnova MyData. This is a single user setup where the server is running together with Mnova on a single computer. This is targeting individual users who want to be able to search the data, keep it organized, etc. We then have what we call Mnova group, and this is set up for groups. So the typical user community here would be between 3 and 30 people, probably in most cases. And everybody can connect to the database and interrogate it. Normally, people will set up 1 to 5 databases, probably, etc. And it's a great tool for collaboration. And then MnovaDB Enterprise is the largest setup. So this is probably for larger organizations, probably companies with several sites, etc., which may want things like replicating databases for backup purposes, for latency purposes, to be able to access database on different server machines, to set up many different databases with complex user access rules, etc. So all that is available. Today, we're going to be using the simplest one, especially because what we had to achieve was to get you to have a database running on your computer just by following instructions from an email today. And then I've got the brief of, in about 25 minutes, show you how to use it and teach you what you can do with it. Okay. As a little bit about features, you can basically associate a structure, for example, to all the analytical data relating to that structure. It could be a structure, it could be a sample number, or any other identifier that you want to choose to bring your data together. The nice thing about it is that when you find some data out of a search, you can find all the other data, analytical data that you have acquired in the past, that you database, and which is related to the same entity, for example, to the same structure. So here for this structure, for example, I can see that I have proton NMR, I have some optical spectroscopy, I have LCMS, and I also have some carbon and some 2D NMRs, okay? So you can imagine maybe just by running a quick search from something else, I actually find that I have a full characterization data set for something very similar. You can store the analytical data, as I explained, that Mnova can handle, but also you can store together with it things like Word documents, PDFs, or zip files, for example. Yeah, so Office documents, sorry, PDFs or zip files. And then how do you search it? Because the value really is in the searching. Okay, so you can search by text. So say, for example, sample number. If you organize yourself with sample numbers, you could do a search. Have I seen this sample number? Or show me the data that I have for this sample number, rather. You can also do things like date search, alphanumerical, etc. When it gets interesting is that you can search by chemical or by spectral parameters. So you can do a structure match or substructure search. So, you know, okay, I think I can work out from my NMR that I probably have this partial structure. Now show me anything on the database that contains this partial structure so that I can compare the analytical data. That would be a typical question. And then you can search by NMR peaks or multiplets, 1D and 2D, LC and GC-MS peaks, isotopic clusters, retention times, higher order MS peaks, and by optical spectra as well. So you can imagine asking very complex questions. Okay, I have an unknown. I've got 1D, 2D NMR, and LCMS, and an infrared. Right, search the database and tell me if there is anything there that matches all this data. If there is, I probably already have the right compound or something very similar. So it's a great indication as to the motif that I'm looking at. And I can probably save myself hours of characterization work. Where can I search? Okay, so the tool is really designed for you to build your own databases, okay, for you to store your data and the data of your group or organization. But we also can connect it to some external databases like the NIST mass spec database or the Wiley NMR databases. Okay, so you could search those together. Say for example, my own NMR data that I acquired and also that of my colleagues combined with the Wiley spectral databases. And you can, as I'm saying, combine these searches. You can customize how you view the results. So there are many different ways in which you can visualize the results depending on what you're trying to achieve or what your workflow is. And this is too advanced for the session we're going to do today. But, you know, if you had an interest in exploring how to improve the result visualization, you can contact us separately, and we can support you with this kind of thing. And the data can be saved manually. So when you finish each analysis, you have an Mnova document, you save it to the database, or it can also be saved automatically by running, for example, an automation, an MGears automation. So we have automation capabilities for that as well. And this is important because typically the most annoying thing about a database environment is that on day one, you don't have any data in it. So it's not very valuable. But if you, for example, have many thousands of analytical data, either in Mnova format or even in raw format, which you have acquired over the years, you could fully automatically populate the database with them, which means that from today, you could potentially be searching and getting a lot of value from maybe running queries and finding things that you did or somebody else did 5 or 6 years ago in your organization. Okay, so that automation I think is also very important. Okay, what can you use it for? Well, you know, for example, natural product replication. You know, I have an unknown, it's a natural product. I can run against everything that I characterized in the past. You know, have I seen this before? Forensics and law enforcement are a very good application. You know, I have, for example, a series of compounds which I'm interested in finding in substances. I can run searches from the new experimental data against the database to see whether I have any, for example, drugs of abuse that I have characterized in the past. It's also the database is a great way of making your NMR, LCMS, GCMS, or optical spectroscopy environment GXP compliant as well, because it allows you to achieve many of the things that GXP inspectors are expecting. Things like, for example, the data once it is saved to the database, it cannot be modified. Or you could set it up so that it cannot be modified. Identify users. The user has to log in and identify themselves before they interact with the data, which can then be kept in the audit trail, etc. So if you are interested in GXP and running or you have a need to run in a GXP manner, again, the database is a great tool to support that, and we will be very happy to discuss this with you separately. If you have an analytical department with several people that are doing maybe characterization, etc., this is a great way for them to share and to benefit from characterizations that other people have done. And it's also an easy way for chemists to access the analytical data. So a lot of universities and companies use the database to set up the data, so that the chemists don't have to go and run around the browser looking in instrument folders and spending a lot of time doing that when a lot of data is being acquired, but can, for example, enter a sample number and just retrieve their data directly. Okay, so this is a little bit of the basis and some of the things that you can achieve with the database, which is great, but I think it's more interesting to actually look at the tool. Okay, so now we are going to move to Mnova. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my Mnova, which hopefully everybody can see now. Now, what some of you may notice is that your interface looks different. If your interface looks different, that's probably because you're running in the classical mode, or with the classical interface, rather than with what we call the modern interface, which is this kind of ribbon interface. So first of all, I would like for this session, everybody to be running the modern interface. To do this, you will go to the File menu, which is the first one here on the left. Preferences, which is the third one from bottom. And this will pop you this dialog. And here, you are going to, in the very first general tab, interface, you will see that here you have theme. And the theme is either classic or modern. So you should choose modern, and you should choose OK. But before you choose OK, we are also going to go to the database. And everybody should do this, by the way, even if you were in the modern interface. We're going to go to File, Preferences, Database. And in the second tab here, in Storage, we are going to make sure that this box is unticked. Show data dialogs. Okay, this is important because we're going to be creating a database in automation, and we want to do that without having to answer some questions that Mnova would otherwise potentially pop in dialogues. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that one more time, guys, because it's important for you to follow the presentation and the demo, that we are all on the same page here. So from Mnova, we go to the File menu. We go to Preferences. In fact, if you are in the classical interface, you need to go to the Edit menu, Preferences. And then this dialog is the same for both. We're going to choose Theme Modern in the interface in general, and then we're going to go to Database, Storage, and make sure that Show Data Dialogs is unticked. OK, and then we're going to click OK. Now, if you have made changes, the software may ask you to close Mnova and reopen it again. So please do so. I will just give you a few seconds so that you have time to close the software and open it again. And what you will find is that everybody now should have a dialog, a ribbon in the top menu which says database. So if you go and find that, guys, and click on it, you should get a ribbon that looks more or less like the one I have here. Okay, and this is how you interact with the database. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to find the button nearly all the way to the right that says Connect. And we are going to connect to the server. Okay. Now, I think you've probably been sent the default login parameters, but you should be pointing at localhost. You should be pointing, you should point at port 5504. This hopefully appears by default. And then your user is capital T, test, and your password is database. Okay, you can click save password so that you don't have to remember this, although it's not very difficult. And then we can all click OK. It looks like nothing has happened, but basically now you have a connection to the database. And you can actually see that at the very bottom right here, where you can see that you have an active database connection. Okay, so the second thing that we have to do, we have to create a database. Okay, and we're going to create a database where we're then going to put some data, then we're going to learn how to search it, etc. So just on top of connect to a server, we have something called manage. So we're going to click on the arrow to the right of that, which gives us this little menu, and we are going to create database. Okay, now this pops a dialog, and we are going to call this workshop example 1, for example. Well, you can call it whatever you want. You could enter a description here to describe what this database is. And if you clicked on advanced and do not do that, you have huge configuration capabilities here. So, depending on exactly the workflows that you're trying to achieve with your database, it may be that some configuration would be advisable. We can again help you with this, but you have the ability to create the databases which are very different from the default. Okay, but the default that you currently have in the software would support making all the typical data fields that are associated to NMR, LCMS, GCMS, and optical spectroscopy data searchable by default. Okay, so if you don't have special fields, this is perfectly good enough, and this is what we're going to do today. Okay, and now we're going to click on Create and Open. Okay, and hopefully you will get a message telling you that the database was created successfully. Okay, so now we all have a database, which is called something like workshop example or something like that. The next thing we want to do is to fill that database, or at least to make this demo a little interesting, to add some records to the database. Okay, so we're going to use an automation for that. Now, with the email that you received with the instructions for the workshop, you should have had a zip file which contains some Mnova documents, MyData Demo 1, Demo 2, Demo 3, Demo 4, etc. And the zip file will be called COVID MyData, I believe. So if you can make sure that you have extracted that zip file and that you have it in your disk, we are now just to have a folder called COVID MyData containing these guys. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go and import everything that's in that folder. Okay, so still in the database menu, so click on database menu. If you're not in this ribbon at the moment, at the very right, there is a button called scripts, which has an arrow at the bottom. We're going to click on that, and the very first script is import document. This is going to allow us to bring in those Mnova documents that I have prepared for you. There are many other import capabilities, so you could import SD files, or you could import raw data by using import files, etc. Today, we are going to use import documents. And then that is going to open a browser, a Windows browser, an operating system browser. You may not be using Windows. And you need to navigate to the folder that contains the data that we sent you today. So please navigate to that COVID MyData folder. Once you select that folder, you click on Select Folder here. The database will probably ask you to confirm the connection, so hopefully it already remembers your details, but otherwise 5504 for the port, test for the user, and database for the password. Click OK. And now you should see a dialog like this. And this dialog is saying, okay, which database do you want to save your data to? At the moment, you probably only have one, although you may have a test database that comes by default. So you need to select the database we have just created. As you can see, I have a number of databases running, available. So I've just chosen that database, and now we're going to click OK. The database has done a quick look and is telling me that there are six files in there, and I'm going to click on OK because I want to import those files. And now, as you will see, you could do this in background mode by default, but we wanted you to see it. The database is going to start importing all this data. So it's going to create a database which is going to contain all the structures, all the NMR data, all the mass spec data, etc., which I pass you in those documents. Okay, so we are going to have to give it a couple of minutes. The fact that it's actually graphical is running with graphical user interface makes it a little slower, but it won't take too long.
So here you can see now it's importing the second document. Now it has imported 3 documents into the database. It now has imported the 4th document, and so on. Now, if you had, for example, a few hundred or a few thousand data sets within a folder structure somewhere in your instrument computer or in some data share, you could actually launch this process and get it to run, for example, overnight, and bring all those data into the database, so that when you come back the following morning, you have a fully populated database you can start interrogating. Okay. There is really no specific limit on the number of data that you can bring in, and we have run some jobs where we have brought in a lot of data. Okay, so hopefully most people are getting to this point now where it actually says imported 6 documents into database, whatever you called it. So we're just clicking OK. Great. So now we can start playing. What I would like you to do, first of all, is we're going to try some of the searches. Okay. So let's go to database menu again. And here you can see you have the ability to show a record, the ability to browse, and also the ability to search. All this is in this ribbon here. Okay, so we're going to start with show record. Okay, so we click on show record and let's choose, for example, record number 1. We click on OK, and that is going to pop you up something that hopefully looks more or less like this. So what we have in here is, if it doesn't look like this, then what you need to do is in this window to go to view and click on record view. Okay, guys, so then it will look something like this. Okay, so here I can see that I have a structure. I can also see that I have associated NMR and mass spec data to this structure. And on the left, I have a field table that has information of interest that I wanted to display. So, for example, molecular formula, monoisotopic mass, as well as some data relevant to or some names, etc., relevant to the analytical data. Now, this that I have here on the left is an NMR preview, and this is a mass spec preview. And in this case, if you all look at my screen now, on this second button here, I can click on the arrow, and this will allow me to select or to look at any other NMR data that I may have for this structure as well. So basically here I can see that I have 4 different NMR data sets and a mass spec. And all this is available and associated together so that I know it all belongs to record 1 and it relates to this structure. Okay, one of the things that people may ask is, could I see all this data together? And yes, you can. This is a default configuration. So if you wanted to see all the data together, you would have another view. So you're not going to do that because you don't have this view, but I'm going to click on this on a different view that I have here. Oops, wrong one. And here you can see that I can see everything open simultaneously at the same time. So this is very configurable, but it is beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. Okay, so guys, now everybody, if you can please close this dialog, the database dialog, so that you are back into Mnova. Right, so we've seen that we can show records, and the second thing that we have here is browse. Okay, so we're going to click on browse, and there should be a dialog that asks us which records you're going to browse. So we're going to go from 1 to 6 and click OK. Now this will open a very similar view to the one that we had before. But the difference is that now I can use this navigator here with these arrows to move
from one record to another. So I can see the structures that I have in the database, and I can see all the analytical data which is associated to these structures. Okay, again, with all the relevant metadata sitting on the table, and again with the ability to check the different data sets that are available there. Something that you can maybe try to do now is you can right click on any of these objects. For example, right click on the NMR spectrum, and there you have the ability to paste that NMR spectrum into Mnova, or you have the ability to paste the whole record into Mnova. So if you are still with me, please click on paste record to Mnova. And what will happen is that every spectra plus the structure and all the metadata that are saved into the database will be retrieved to my local Mnova installation, which allows me to work with this data, to take a look at maybe how I characterized it in the past, or in this case, you are actually looking at what I did earlier today or yesterday and save to the database. So this could be another one of your colleagues in your group or your department that did a characterization, and you can immediately see it and find it in the database. Okay, so hopefully everybody now has something like a mass spec here on the front page, on the first page, and then a proton NMR, a carbon NMR, and several 2D correlations. Okay, so what I would like you to do now, guys, is to click on the mass spec. And the mass spec should be showing a UV trace on the top, a TIC in the middle, and a mass spectrum in the bottom. Okay, so let's imagine that you don't have the rest of the data. You, at this point, just run a mass spec, an LCMS in this case, and you want to know whether for this specific mass, for example, that you have at the bottom here, there is anything else with this mass already available in the database that you and your colleagues have been building. So what you can do is you can click on the mass spectrum, and then you can come here to MS search, arrow at the bottom, little arrow here, allows you to actually to either search a retention time, in which you would enter a retention time and a tolerance, or it allows you to mass spec search. So in this case, we're going to click on mass spec search. And what the software is going to do is it's going to run this query. So it's going to send this isotopic cluster to the database, and it's going to say or ask the question, is there anything with this MOVC value and this kind of isotopic cluster in the database already? So we click OK, and you should get something like this pop up, which is your result. So the record number 6 of the database, which has this structure, has this LCMS and has an isotopic cluster, which is very similar to mine. Now, without me having to go and acquire NMR data, I could then take a look and say, okay, I see that somebody already ran this. They saw this isotopic cluster. They got some NMR. Okay, so as we did before, guys, here you could review the different NMR spectra. Okay, so I have a full characterization. So maybe what I'm going to do is, and I also have a structure, by the way. Great, so maybe what I'll do is I'll run a proton, and then if my proton also matches this, I probably have answered my question already of what do I have in my LCMS. Okay, so you can basically do mass spec search. You can ask the question, anything which has this retention time in the database, or the question, anything which has this mass spec in the database. Now, the other thing that is interesting, or let's say the way we have designed the interface so that it is fully integrated with Mnova, is that if you guys go back to the close the dialog, sorry, the database dialog, and come back to Mnova, you can also modify your query by, for example, zooming into an area of the mass spectrum. So this is the isotopic cluster, but if I only want to match or to search for the first 2 peaks, I can zoom into an area of the canvas which only has the first 2 peaks of the cluster. And now, if I again do a mass spec search, as we did before, you see that the query is only these 2 peaks now. So before I was matching the whole cluster with 4 or 5 peaks, or the whole MS spectrum, in fact. Now I'm matching just a couple of the peaks in the cluster. And that will be enough to give me a good hit. Okay, so we're going to cancel because we don't want to spend so much time on the mass spec right now, because we want to look at some other of the ways in which we can search. Okay, so for example, let's imagine if we all go to the proton, I've run a proton spectrum, and again, I want to know, okay, do I have anything with, for example, an aromatic region that looks like this in the database already? So I can zoom into the aromatic region, something like this, and then here, as you will see, in the dialog, you have NMR search. So we did a mass spec search before. Now we're going to do an NMR search. So you can click on the little arrow and you have the possibility to do peak search. That means that I will be looking to match 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 8 peaks that I have in screen with their peak positions. Or I can do a multiplet search, which means that I will look to match these 2 multiplets. Or I could do a spectrum search, which means that I will look to find the spectra which have very similar lines or line shapes to this one. Okay, so in this case, let's click on multiplet search. Again, the software is telling me this is the query that I'm going to run. And here you actually can set up search parameters. For example, if I click on here, you could say, okay, I have a tolerance, which is this much for, I can allow so many hits, maximum number of records that I want to see, maximum hit quality, and a tolerance for position, and also I'm allowing a width and an integral, etc. So, all your searching parameters are there, but I think that's a little bit too much for today. So let's just close that dialog and click on OK. The software is now gone to the database, and it has returned, in this case, one spectrum here, which has an aromatic region that contains peaks very similar to the ones that I have there. We do have quite a big tolerance, so we're going to find too many hits, so the tolerance probably needs to be optimized. And then in this case, it has found a second record, which is the right record. But I could bring both of these into the software and compare them to the to what I have in my query. So again, I can use Proton NMR to see whether I have similar stuff in the database. Okay, so hopefully everybody's following me still. We're going to close this dialog, and we're now going to go and do the same with a 2D. So let's click on the HSQC, for example, which should be the third page. And we can, again, by pressing the letter Z, or C if you're American, we can click and drag to zoom into an area of the spectrum. And now we can go to NMR search and click, in this case, let's click on peak search. Okay, so now the question is, have I seen an HSQC which has peaks like this with the same chemical shifts, etc. And again, I find my hits in the database, in this case, just one. So I can check what somebody in the past or even myself acquired, which was similar to this. So I may get already a very good idea of what I may have in my current sample by looking at stuff that has very similar analytical data. Okay, so that is pretty powerful. You can do the same for optical spectroscopy. I'm a little bit limited on time, so we're gonna move a little further. If you go to other searches, you could do this for example, numeric searches, text search, you know, so show me anything that chemist called Santi Dominguez has run combined with a date and time search in the last 2 months. Right, that will show you everything that I saved to the database in the last 2 months. And you also have this thing here called advanced search. And this allows you to build, if you click on it, it will show you, at the moment I have several queries. So I have every data set that I have open in my page. So a mass spec search, a proton search for peaks, a proton search for multiplets, etc. So 2D searches as well, and I can use OR and AND modifiers. Okay, I can here, for example, say I don't want to do this peak search. I only want to search for multiplets in the proton. And here in the 2D, I can say, okay, I'm not going to search the ROSI because it's too busy and I'm probably going to hit a lot of stuff I'm not interested in, so I take it away. But I do want to add a retention time search, for example. Okay, so you have the ability to build very complex queries. If you have a very large database, imagine with hundreds of thousands of records or millions of records, then obviously you want to be using more restrictions so that you get to a meaningful set of results. Okay, we're not going to run an advanced query. I just wanted to highlight that is there. So we're going to close this window now. And maybe we're going to do one final thing, which is we're going to go to the file menu on the left. So if you click on that and everybody clicks on new, we are also going to look at how to run a structure search or a substructure search. Okay, so if everybody can move to the molecule ribbon, so in your dialog, in your menus here on the top, you should see a molecule ribbon. And here you can actually draw molecules in Mnova. You're probably aware of this already. You can also import molecules which are saved in mol format or in SD format and some other export formats for different drawing packages. For example, CD XML for CanDraw and some others. Or you can also draw your own molecule here. So what I'm going to do, you are welcome to follow me if you want to also try this out. Otherwise, you can just watch. I'm going to click on molecule template here. On the arrow down, I'm going to select a benzene. And now I'm just going to draw a chain, which is the second one from the left here. So I'm going to add a chain here. So let's say that by looking at my NMR, I've worked out that I have this. And maybe I think that I have an oxygen here. So if we hover over number 7 and click the letter O. Okay. So guys, if you hover over number 7 and you click the letter O, hopefully you get an oxygen on there. Okay. So anyway,
Santi, go to the preferences and molecule.
Preferences. Molecule.
And keyboard editing always available. Go down.
Yeah. Thank you, Pablo.
Go down. Yeah.
This is one of these obscure things I didn't know about, but interestingly, it was working 20 minutes ago. But anyway, Right. So, okay, guys, that is file. If any of you are having the same problem, file, preferences, molecule, and then keyboard editing, always available towards the bottom of the dialog. Okay, so now we have here a partial structure, and we can now all go to the database dialog again, and on the very left you see that you have molecule search. If you click on the arrow, this allows you to do a structure search. That would be an exact structure match. Okay, so do I have this structure in the database? Substructure search would be, do I have this as a partial structure of any of the structures that I have in my database? And formula search is self-explanatory. Okay, so if I click on, in this case, on substructure search, I'll go and search the database to try to find this as a substructure of the structures in the database. And again, I got a hit. You can see the structure here, and which contains that substructure, and I can see that I already have data which has been acquired in the past when this structure was characterized. So this would allow me, for example, to bring this proton spectrum into Mnova and compare it to, for example, a spectrum that I have already acquired from which I derived this substructure. Okay, so hopefully this gives you an idea. I don't really have time to cover much more. Maybe to recap, you have the ability to use databases, even to be able to search very quickly your own work, and you can build the databases with all the data that you have acquired and processed in the past. If you are working on your own or you're interested in having your data organized and readily accessible, you can do the same with the group database flavor. If you are a group or a small department or something like that, where maybe you're interested in people being able to share characterizations, etc., and to all benefit from the work of others, you can, by the way, limit it by different groups, etc., so you can determine who you share with and who has access to what databases. And then if you're a large organization, you can use the enterprise flavor of the system to allow you to have many different databases set up for the complex user access, etc. But the fundamentals is that you can basically search into all the data that you have run in the past, and you can associate it by molecule or by sample number, and then easily find it by just searching from NMR, from mass spec features, from optical spectroscopy features, structure and substructure, as well as text searching. Okay, so that is what we have time for today. I would encourage you, if you have this installed, to keep playing with it and maybe to start adding some of your own data so that you can actually search for something which is more relevant to you than what I gave you this morning. I'll also like to remind you that we have a few more workshops coming up, so please register if you're interested in any of them.